Back in the 90s, the Sega Game Gear followed in the footsteps of its older brother, the Sega Genesis, and was marketed as the cooler, more mature handheld when compared to the Game Boy DMG. Its Master System-inspired hardware and color screen made it the envy of the handheld market. While the Game Gear was cool in the 90s, Father Time has not been kind to the Game Gear. Sega's poor component choices make finding a working system in the wild extremely difficult. So in this video, let's do a restoration on a Game Gear and consolize it to make it playable on the big screen. So as mentioned in the intro, finding a Game Gear in good working order is harder than it sounds. Many of the Game Gears out there suffer from either video or audio issues due to poor capacitor used by Sega, and the one in front of you is no exception. But you know, I have to admit, I was an Atari Lynx and Game Boy DMG kid growing up, so I reached out to Tom and Lacey from DoYouNerd to get their thoughts on some mods that we should do to make this Game Gear a heck of a lot better.
Sup, Rocker Gaming? What's happening?
So I'm glad you are up for the challenge because we've really taken to enjoying the Game Gear lately. Seriously, this is a really neat system.
Yeah, I mean, it's like having a Sega Master System on the go.
However, I do want to see some mods on this thing, starting with battery life, because this thing eats through batteries fast, like really fast. I'm talking Sonic doing a shuttle loop on Green Hill Zone fast.
And how about some TV outputs, because I want to watch it too, and I'm not looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, how about we see the 160 by 144 pixel screen in some big screen glory. And, you know, if we're going to put this on the TV, let's go ahead and just put a controller port in there, because look, this feels fine, but it doesn't quite match that Sega Genesis controller feel. Well, what do you think, buddy? Can you make this happen?
Oh, so we're talking about consolizing a Game Gear? Well, I'm not the one to say no to a challenge, so let's rip this thing open. So with that console ripped open, first thing we need to do is replace all those capacitors. Now, fair warning, if you end up trying this yourself, expect to smell this when you heat up electrolytic fluid that comes from a capacitor. Yeah, don't ask me why that's what came to mind, but hey, it did. So the actual process to replace a capacitor isn't too bad, it's just a little bit time consuming. The thing that makes it unfortunate is all of the capacitors are glued down with a little bit of epoxy. So to free the epoxy from the capacitor, I just used my needle nose plier, then lifted it with my finger, removed the actual capacitor using my soldering iron, and then came the lengthy process of cleaning the pads and the electrolytic fluid. So to do that, I used some IPA, and then I used a carbon fiber pen to clean up the area, not shown here. Finally, I removed the excess solder with some solder wick, soldered new solder on, tacked in the capacitor, and finally made a solid joint. That's one down, only about another dozen to go between the soundboard and the PCB. I'll take care of those off camera. With that done, I'm just going to test the system before we get into any of the mods. And sure enough, it works exactly as it's supposed to. So one of the things that Tom and Lacey had mentioned was finding a way to extend battery life. So the major drain of power on the Sega Game Gear is actually the CFL light bulb that lights up the back screen. Yeah, you know those like big tube fluorescent bulbs? There's actually one of those in the Game Gear. So let's pull that out and replace it with an LED back screen, which should dramatically increase the battery life. Removing all the high frequency bits is easy enough. Using my desoldering pump, along with some desolder braid, made quick work out of it. Now the one part that's extremely fiddly is having to cut the existing backing for the screen to only include the supports. If I wasn't an idiot, I would have designed some 3D printed parts for it.
What? What an idiot! Oh, what a loser!
Easy jazz. Now if someone could step up in the community and make these, it would be a huge help for this mod going forward. So with those supports cut and the backlight in, the only thing left to do is solder it in. As Tom and Lacey mentioned, getting video out and being able to use a controller on the Game Gear and effectively consolizing it would be incredible. So let's talk about how to make that happen. There's 3 different mod kits to get video out from a Game Gear. Option 1 is an RGB kit by Tim Worthington. Option 2 is a McWill screen replacement with the VGA adapter. Or option number 3 from Wutaku Store is an RGB and Genesis console-izing kit. Now we opted to go with option number 3 as it was an all-in-one package. The only downside to using this mod is it only offers RGB out, so you don't get any S-video or composite. While in the end we ended up getting this mod working the exact way it should have, I think if I had the opportunity to do it again, I'd like to give Tim Worthington's a try, simply because it offers more variability and options other than just RGB. Obviously, if you got the cash burning a hole in your pocket, McWill's is clearly the best. But what I will say, irrespective of whoever's mod kit you choose, whenever you're consolizing a Game Gear, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of tedious soldering. None of it's particularly hard, so to speak, it's just a lot of runs of wires, going a lot of different places, and keeping it all organized is a little bit easier said than done. So finally, the last thing I wanted to do was create a custom 3D printed mount in order to hold the Game Gear while it's being played as a console. So to do that, I created a 3D printed model, printed that up, and it actually ended up working out pretty well. Well, with all that heavy lifting out of the way, it's time to do us a test. So let's get this thing set up and see how it looks on a CRT. Any flickering you're seeing related here is just obviously the refresh rate being different on the screen versus my camera. But look at that, the output on the CRT looks great, and it matches what's on my Game Gear screen. Now I wanted to show you guys what it looks like on the big screen, and unfortunately I didn't use my FrameMeister to do the capture on this, so the image is stretched just a little bit. But either way, as you guys can see here, Sonic 2 looks awesome on the big screen. Colors are really actually very vivid and look really nice, and honestly, it's much easier to play on the big screen than it is on that handheld screen. Next, I wanted to try my luck with a fighting game. Now, I openly admit this is not the best port of this game, and you're much better off playing it on 16-bit hardware. However, this was a great test for the controller because the inputs need to be precise. I was fairly impressed with how the gamepad performed, and it seemed to be working really well. Next up, I threw in one of my favorite beat-em-ups, Double Dragon. Now, I really enjoyed the Double Dragon series, and this is a nice little port right here, and it's a lot of fun to play on the big screen. Well, in the end, this consolized Game Gear turned out absolutely awesome. I really want to thank Tom and Lacey from DoYouNerd for coming on to the channel and helping me come up with some ideas of mods that we should do to this Game Gear. Make sure you guys check out their channel, link is in the description below. With all that being said, guys, thanks for checking out the video, and I'll catch you for the next one here soon.